I thank you, Presiding Officer. We are now in our 100th year since the First World War drew to its conclusions. I think it's appropriate, therefore, to take just a little time out to reflect on this important debate on veterans, to speak a little bit about the contribution that Stirling and my constituency made during that most hellish of wars. Many members may know that Stirling Castle was the hub for recruitment during World War I. Stirling's central location, its railway access, made it the perfect spot for recruitment and transit of troops and other personnel. Young men trained and gathered at Stirling Castle. They would march down to the railway station to complete, at the beginning of a journey that would see many of them complete their life's journey in places of horror like the killing fields and the muddy hell that was Flanders. Now, I cannot help but when I attend the remembrance service at the Church of the Holyrood, which is the top of the city of Stirling, as I did Sunday past, and in the past these men will have walked down past this church on the way to the railway station. I can't help but think of them as part of that remembrance service. Because in numbers too many to imagine, they made the ultimate sacrifice then, and in the century that has followed, others have done the same. And countless numbers have returned from battlefields of the past and present with broken bodies and broken minds. It's for that reason, amongst others, I think this debate today is so important that we're having on veterans. Now, my own family has some of its own proud connections with the military. One of my sons served in the RAF. My father was in the Royal Household Cavalry, and my grandfather fought with the Scottish Horse during the First World War. My grandfather fought at Gallipoli, and like many men of his generation, would only very quietly discuss some of the horrors he'd witnessed after a few drams at family gatherings. But these stories, I remember as a young man, had a real impact on me. And I've no doubt he was left damaged by the horrors he'd witnessed, and particularly in the battles he'd tell us about in regard to the armies of Turkey. Of course, today, he would all have likelihood been recognised as suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. And today, he'd be able to access services and help from organisations such as PTSD Resolution or Combat Stress, charitable organisations that help veterans re-engage with mainstream life. The PTSD Resolution once said of veterans seeking help, they often find us because their partner has told them, you have to get help because I can't do anything more. You can just see that situation, utter desperation for some of these families who are having to deal with some of these damaged men and women who've come back from areas of conflict. And these organisations do an amazing job trying to help them, and all the support we can give them, the better. But this tells us, whilst much of the discussion today will undoubtedly be on the importance of making these support services accessible, there's also an important role from families and loved ones to play a role on the recovery journey for some veterans. That's something that we do a lot better today, yes, than was the case for people like my grandfather in the past. Presiding Officer, in the early days of the first SNP minority government, not long after being appointed a minister, the then First Minister asked me to take on a role of liaison between the Ministry of Defence and the Scottish Government. And in meetings soon after coming into government with the Tri-Services heads, I recall Alex Salmond saying very powerfully that the armed forces, and particularly our veterans, were part of the vital threads that made up the very tartan of Scotland. What the First Minister was trying to do was say he was pledging that in Scotland we would strive to make veterans services in Scotland the very best services available anywhere on these islands. And at First Minister's questions last week in this chamber, the current First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, laid out in an answer to my question just how some of that pledge has been put into effect. And the Cabinet Secretary referred to some of these matters, as did Maurice Golding and Corrie in their opening contributions. And since 2008, more than £1 million has been invested through the Scottish Veterans Fund to support more than 140 projects across Scotland. Funding has provided invaluable support across important devolved areas such as housing, health, employment support for veterans. And of course, we now have the employability group that has been established to lead work in that area. And £5 million has rightly been committed to ensure that veterans in receipt of social care receive full value for their war pension. The rationale for that was laid out quite well, I think, by the Cabinet Secretary in his opening remarks. Presiding Officer, this work's vital because it's widely known fact that those leaving the armed forces, settling into mainstream life anywhere in the United Kingdom can be a real challenge. And that's reflected in a report which the UK Justice Ministries published earlier this year that showed that 2,500 former armed services personnel began serving prison sentences last year. This indicates, a real need to address how we continue to improve mental health and well-being amongst the veterans community. Yes, it's true that by far the vast majority of veterans, because of the skills they've gained in the armed services and the values that they come out of the services with, make a quite remarkable contribution to our society and our life in Scotland. But these are real challenges still that we must continue to tackle and face head-on in order to ensure that as a society we're offering our veterans the best possible support. Presiding Officer, with these facts in mind, I'd like to pay a bit of a tribute to the work that's been done by the Stirling Citizens Advice Bureau to provide advice and support to armed services and communities and their families. The CAB Armed Services Advice Project works in a funding group that's fronted by Poppy Scotland, who frankly do a quite amazing job in Scotland. It offers support where it can to serving or former armed forces personnel, either regular or service, or their dependents. And this is a crucial lifeline to those who use these services and offers valuable advice and specialist help in a range of areas. Areas including welfare entitlement, debt management, seeking employment, as well as relationships and housing. This support is free, it's confidential, it's impartial, exactly what many men and women who've close connections with the armed forces need in order to help them deal with the everyday stresses of life. Now, I want to commend the government bringing forward this debate today because I think it's hugely important in this week as we've just come past the Remembrance Day services, obviously, and the obviously approach of Maurice Corrie and the way he's gone about his business earlier on today as well. So I commend the government for bringing this forward, and I look forward to listening to others' contributions this afternoon. Thank you.